whilst I don't think any generation, as we know them, are flawless, I think there are often many significantly stark contributions, both positive and negative, each generation proffers to society at large, broadly. And I think Gen X, whilst being the forgotten in a lot of ways, or the overstepped generation, it almost went straight from boomers to millennials in terms of everything from culture wars to politics to social, you could say, and cultural touchstones. I think the biggest plague that Gen X unleashed upon us with their machinations is the idea of a self-help book. Now, I don't find the notion of self-help distasteful. As it is, you have the idea that you want to become a better version of yourself, and that is something that I can definitely vouch for. It's something that I champion myself. But I think there's this strain of, I really want to say, self-sacrifice to the grander notions of someone else, that you basically stop embodying your own whims, fancies, and, say, ego, and you become someone else's idea of a productive human or of a better version of you. To say, I'll take you and design you into someone else, and that someone else is better than you on who you are. And this is that, I think, basic thesis or the schema on these self-help books, is they take the idea that you can become better by following some quick steps or a hack, or there's some trickery of the mind whereby you can now convince yourself to do certain things that make you be better. You're a better version of yourself. And once again, this probably is an echo of the ubermensch as an appeal. It's to say you can become the Superman, and this is the version of yourself that is going beyond what the earthly constraints of your fate allowed for. But I think what's lost here, and obviously we can always sit here and begrudge and demean normies. It's very easy, I won't bother. But it's to say, the thing that maybe normies like about these things is it creates this idea that you're not actually personally responsible for your own faults to a degree, or the lack of progress in your life is down to not knowing. It's down to an ignorance, and ignorance is fine. Everyone's ignorant about something. We were born ignorant, and I think life is a development of experiences which hopefully enlighten us to that degree. It provides an edifying experience, and then we can take that through as wisdom and all this sort of good stuff. But in general, if you find that a normie has purchased one of these awful tomes, then you'll understand that they're trying to replicate learning for life. It's to say, if in general life, which is heuristically lived, is in a certain way, is there some tool that I can apply in my brain when I encounter these things to garner maybe a certain outcome, or to make sure that my station is lifted in certain ways. Now, they're not hard skills. They're much more meta skills almost. It's like cognition and neotic transitioning away from what were probably bad heuristics to good heuristics. And in general, that's, once again, it's an appreciable task. It's one of those things where you can commend someone for doing something around this. But I think because the accessibility in general has to be at a level for the layman, which is not always going to carry the nuance required to actually uplift what would be a better version of yourself, or require the uplift of you to be that better version. How do you become your destiny? And that sort of action-oriented language, and particularly when it's literature, is not necessarily able to be conveyed in that way. It's much easier to stand there in an army and have a general shout at you and tell you to do things, and you feel as if you've been stimulated or motivated in these ways where it's very direct and you have a physiological response to it. It's harder to get this from a book. It's one of those things you can't convey just as well unless it's in person. So you have to rely on the written word. And the written word is very, very powerful when it is something where I think beauty or notions of heroism or you can say mythologies are intertwined with our own lived experiences, and we can carry a lot of that across. But that's not this type of literature. This type of literature is very basic. Here's 9 things to know. Here's 15 ways to wash your balls. These are very specific types of tips and tricks almost. And when you have this bastardization and reductionism, you just get a dilution of the actual effect of what you want out of this stuff. It's to say, I've reduced what you should know into a book, read it, and now your life is better. And even some, you could call them quasi pseudo-intellectuals, like to do this stuff. And Nassim Taleb with his anti-fragility and Black Swan theory. You have even on here Dale Carnegie doing How to Win Friends and Influence People. These are all these very, I would say, even not turbo normie, but maybe super normie, in that they're adjacent to the normie sphere. It's once you get baby's first introduction into intellectualism, it's I've got a master's degree, thus I am better than the peons. So if I have a master's degree, it must mean I'm smart, and if I'm smart, then I should be making better decisions, and if I'm making better decisions, then I'll be better off, and I'll be richer, or I'll be happier, or I'll be more powerful. Or you can see this general notion of how the train of thought to action is supposed to carry you across time and space, and whether it does or not is almost irrelevant to the context of the book, because the books, they're just, these books in particular cannot do these things. They're just not possible to imbue you with the strength. So my suggestion is, and this is particularly to the Gen X, so this is those people, you might say, is of the Joe Rogan era, or the other podcasters of that vein, so the Huberman, or I'm sure there's a plethora of Gen X podcasters that I've never bothered to listen to or read, when their idea or the way that they interact with literature, particularly in the self-help discipline, is really just basic. These books designed around how to commercialize the idea of self-help. You see here, I've got 2 recommendations for you, and I can maybe encourage you to go in with an open mind in your own lability here. So if you're more labile than not, then this is always going to be better. But if you are pretty staunch and steadfast in your ways, then it's very difficult for you to be improved, if that makes sense. Now maybe you're perfect, you're at the apex of your life, and there's no need for perfection, but for improvement. But I think in general that these 2 books here, Beyond the Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche and Max Stirner's The Ego on Its Own, have done more to develop my you could say psychological anima for action, for purpose, for being. All of these very intrinsic values, and it's not feel-goodery. I think it's genuine attempts to tap into that spiritual soul realm, which unleashes your ability to create and manufacture and manifest your own destiny. You really need to know a lot about yourself, and you can't do that with spooks. So Max Stirner's work, he basically goes through all of these notions and social fabrications around why you think and feel certain things is probably related to the reasons that society makes you think them, or your family and friends make you think them, or indoctrination at school makes you think them. That theologically, if you've been into a church or some form of religion, that they've dogmatically presented you a worldview, some notions around how to interact with things that just aren't necessary. They're spooks. They're these things that haunt your psyche, and you need to either both disavow them and then disabuse yourself of them. You need to remove them. And this is, you can call it a de-spookification. You can think of yourself as employing the Ghostbusters into your own brain here, and getting rid of all these things, because all these notions are artificial. They're not real. They're just things that have been put on you. They're enforced into your brain, and your cerebral cortex is now cluttered with all this ghosts. And then I think once you've gotten to that stage, and it is a very difficult psychically impairing stage, you feel as if it is something where all the things that you thought you knew may not actually be true. Do I actually have to behave in a certain way to certain people and respect things and understand that some people's wishes and wills are as important as my own? And all of these considerations, particularly that we've been brought up as social norms, don't actually have to be true. Some of them you may consider to be true on reflection, and then agree with them and embody them in your spirit and your soul. But some of them you can just do away with. There's no necessity to these things. And this is how we can also conceive being beyond good and evil, and Nietzsche's will to power, is that once you've come into the relationship of your soul to yourself, to your ego, how you've tapped into that spirit and listening to the actual wants and wills of yourself, then you will understand what it is you want to start to be doing. And now on the application of doing, of taking thought forms and turning them into action, what is it we can then apply? And then maybe some of these heuristics can be useful if they're, I guess there's Atomic Habits here or something, or I don't know about The Alchemist, that dog shit book. But in general, I think you can start to see that the reflection of someone's optimal code of conduct, you could say, how there could be this categorical imperative for certain behavior, and Peirce calls these habits. How do you develop and form these habits? This decision around an interaction and an activity. With this, then potentially you can have some of these wonks deliver you some tidbits. But in general, I think that the value of this punditry is very low. And if you have actually purchased one of these books, you should consider mailing it back to the author with some dog shit in it, because that's the value of it, basically. It's worthless, and even worse than worthless, it's probably poisonous to a lot of the own ideals that you hold sacred, and in your own, I would say, toxically and polluting your own mantra. How is it that you consider yourself to be yourself? It's not by being deluded by some ugly woman here. So I think that's probably the core message I have here, is to say, if you take anything away from this, it's that you should definitely read these two books, whatever it takes. And that means if you're starting to read Stirner and it's too complex, start with whatever is the introductory to Stirner. Start with a secondary source. I don't recommend secondary source, but if you can just sort of slowly plug away at Stirner here, and then it can be concomitant or it can be post facto, you go into Beyond Good and Evil, and I think then you'll have what is the ability to think for yourself, and this independent critical analysis of both your life and your fancies, your anima. All of these things become much more evident once you've been able to get behind the veil, once you've been able to tap into that source code or whatever nonsense designation, etymology you have for it. Now, I will, here at the end, just suggest that it is a spiritual journey, and so to take it very lightly, I think, is also not the approach. This is very serious stuff. Obviously, these self-help books are dog shit, but the idea that you can become the Uberman is actually a very serious task. It's a quest, and you can't take that first step if, as I've shown you with Stirner, if you're stuck in a haunted house. So that can be your first mission: is let me escape the haunted house of my own mind.